An assassination threatens to divide the United States. American democracy is in crisis.
The crime on that day caused shockwaves that profoundly altered the course of American history.
A gruesome series of murders grips London in fear and terror. The hunt for the killer sparks a media frenzy. A legal scandal splits an entire nation. The French military perverts the course of justice and condemns an innocent man.
The Dreyfus Affair was like a seminal turning point in French history. It galvanized the entire country.
These spectacular crimes moved people and changed the world.
Everyone come out the door.
Toulouse, southern France. On the evening of October the 13th, 1761, investigator David de Baudrigue is en route to the Rue des Filatiers. An excited crowd waits for him in front of house number 16. Has a crime occurred here? Inside, the investigator finds the Calas family and the body of their son, Marc-Antoine. He has neck injuries that indicate strangulation. The family claims to have found their son dead on the floor.
Madame.
But David de Baudrigue is skeptical. Did an intruder kill Marc-Antoine? Or is the murderer to be found in the Calas family circle?
Amenez-les.
The building still exists. Claude Dupuis, president of the Calas Association, knows its history. He has dealt intensively with the case.
We are here in the corridor, at the entrance to the shop that stood here. David de Baudrigue arrives and determines that the house door is locked. So it's hard to imagine someone coming in from the outside to kill Marc-Antoine. He assumes that the family has murdered their son.
Baudrigue immediately has the family members arrested. The investigator suspects the perpetrator was the father, Jean Calas. Calas is a Protestant cloth merchant who has lived for many years in predominantly Catholic Toulouse. But what turns Jean Calas into a suspect? Rumors are circulating in Toulouse that his son, Marc-Antoine, wanted to convert to Catholicism. Did Jean Calas use force to try to prevent him from doing so? The case seems clear to the Catholic Church. It allows Marc-Antoine to be buried as a martyr to his faith.
The bigger picture, I think, is about the impact that religion and negative views of people who have a different religion from oneself, it's what that can lead to.
Beginning in 1560, French Protestants, called Huguenots, were persecuted in Catholic France. A civil war rages almost continuously for nearly 40 years. 250,000 Huguenots flee the country. The effects of the wars are still felt in 1761.
The relationship between Catholics and Protestants was extremely tense. Toulouse's population was for the most part Catholic. The Protestants were in the minority and were under great pressure.
The clues at the scene do not point to an intruder. Finally, the family changes its testimony. They claim Marc-Antoine was not strangled, but had committed suicide.
Due to the discrepancies in their story, they were forced to say he had hanged himself. But why had they lied? Were they now telling the truth?
The family claims to have discovered Marc-Antoine hanging from a doorframe. But why did Jean Calas and his family cover up the suicide?
Mais très vite, il décide.
The father wanted to protect Marc-Antoine because at that time suicide was considered a crime against oneself, and the punishment for the crime was to bind the victim behind a cart, face down, and to drag them through the streets of Toulouse before throwing the corpse into a mass grave. This idea was unbearable to the family, and they tried to avoid the disgrace.
Yet the investigators no longer believe Jean Calas' statements, even though there is no proof of his guilt. Thus, Baudrigue resorts to more extreme measures. He hopes to force the father to confess under torture.
Don't you want to confess? Can you not confess?
Torture was a completely legal and expected investigative tool. It's a method of getting information out of people.
Jean Calas withdraws his confession, though this doesn't help him much in court. The Catholic Church has great influence on the judiciary. If the Church wants a judgment in its favor, it doesn't hesitate to place pressure on the witnesses. Only one of 87 witnesses thinks Jean Calas is innocent.
There were only rumors, but at the time, they were sometimes treated as proof.
It may seem strange to a modern viewer, but French law and indeed Roman canon law allowed this.
On March the 9th, 1762, the court sentences Jean Calas to death on the wheel, a particularly gruesome method of execution. He proclaims his innocence until the end. Jean Calas is publicly executed one day after the judgment, but this doesn't put an end to the case.
A merchant from Marseille who had come to Toulouse on business was a witness to the execution on Saint-Georges Square. As luck would have it, he knew Voltaire.
Philosopher and writer Voltaire is an important thought leader during the Age of Enlightenment. He is known for his sharp criticism of the state and the church. The Calas case piques his interest. He suspects that religious fanaticism has led to the death sentence.
Voltaire was a bit skeptical at first. He was not convinced of Calas's innocence, but he wanted to know more.
Monsieur Voltaire? Monsieur Calas.
Voltaire begins to research the case and scrutinizes the court records. Since he wants to know what really happened, he also meets with members of the Calas family. Voltaire comes to the conclusion that Jean Calas was unjustly convicted. To him, the case is just one example of a national problem.
He was of the opinion that the Church had much too much influence on the justice system. And that was not just a local problem. This deplorable state of affairs was evident throughout France.
Voltaire uses the Calas case in his fight for reason and against religious fanaticism. He hopes to use the judicial murder to show the general public how the state and church abuse their power. In 1763, he publicly charges the judiciary. In his Treatise on Tolerance, he calls for the rehabilitation of the Calas family. The book serves as a wake-up call for enlightened France and has lost none of its relevance today.
When you read this little book, you might think it was written today. When the Charlie Hebdo journalists were murdered, scores of young people bought Voltaire's Treatise on Tolerance. It's a part of our history and our value system.
des valeurs que nous mettons.
In 1765, a Paris court reverses the judgment against Jean Calas in a revision process. He is posthumously exonerated, and the family is rehabilitated. The Calas case shows how the Catholic Church was able to influence the judiciary to promote its interests. Voltaire's campaign against the judgment still stands as an example of civil courage today and is considered a milestone of the French Enlightenment. Washington, April the 14th, 1865. American President Lincoln is assassinated during a visit to the theater. The nation stands on the edge of an abyss.
We talk about losing our democracy now. There was a real possibility of losing it then as well.
In November 1860, U.S. citizens vote Abraham Lincoln the 16th President of the United States. His election increases tensions in the nation. Lincoln is considered an opponent of slavery. Most of the northern states formally abolished slavery in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Yet the agriculture-based South still clings to the practice. As a reaction to Abraham Lincoln's election as president, the southern states secede from the North and form a confederacy. Their division leads to the American Civil War. Lincoln wants to preserve the nation's unity. About 2 years before the start of the conflict, he declares the abolition of slavery in all states as a goal of the war effort. On April the 9th, 1865, the largest Southern army capitulates in the last decisive battle. The war is considered to be over. Between 1861 and 1865, an estimated more than 700,000 lose their lives.
So there was a psychological scar on the land as well as a physical one. And there was a great deal of resentment on the part of both sides.
Lincoln begins his second term of office in 1865. He makes it his mission to reintegrate the southern states into the Union.
He says that the war was given by God as a punishment for what the country had done in terms of slavery. He says, malice towards none and charity for all. So we were all Americans and we should pull together, and take care of each other. But not everyone saw it that way.
On the evening of April the 14th, 1865, Lincoln and his wife attend Ford's Theater in Washington with 2 companions. They are there to see the comedy Our American Cousin. The box is reserved for the president. But the Lincolns and their friends, military officer Rathbone and his fiancée, arrive late. Tour guide Eric Martin has worked at Ford's Theater for 22 years. He can reconstruct the events of that evening to the minute.
10:13 p.m., President Lincoln was seated on the far right-hand side in that rocking chair. Mary Todd Lincoln was seated in that black cane chair just to the right of the print of George Washington. A man in a dark suit approached, made his way up a spiral staircase, and very casually walked over towards his side wall. Many people in the audience saw the man, instantly famously recognizable. It was a famous actor.
It's 26-year-old John Wilkes Booth, one of the most famous American stage actors.
Booth approached that yellow door that you see there, and at the time he approached that yellow door, the guard was not there, John Parker. President Lincoln may have told the guard to go take a seat somewhere else in the theater or perhaps step outside. All that was there was a messenger named Charles Forbes, and John Wilkes Booth very casually pulled out a calling card and presented it to Charles Forbes, and words were exchanged between the 2 men, and John Wilkes Booth was admitted in.
The bullet hits the president in the head. When people try to catch Booth, he pulls a knife.
Booth turns to jump over the balustrade to the right of the print of George Washington, right out here. And just as Booth turns to jump, Rathbone attempts to grab the tail end of Booth's riding coat, causing Booth to fall off balance, catching a spur in that U.S. Center Treasury Regimental Guards flag, causing him to fall off balance, crashing onto the stage 12.5 feet, possibly breaking his left leg. With the bloody dagger still in his hand, from which he just stabbed Major Rathbone, he cries out the words, "Sic semper tyrannis." That's the Latin for "thus ever to tyrants," and then fled across the stage diagonally and exited out the back door. And then there's just total pandemonium and chaos in the theater, people climbing over one another, trying to get to the theater box. So guards, those that were military in the theater, try to get some semblance of order.
3 doctors in the audience provide the president with first aid. What drove young actor John Wilkes Booth to commit this deed just days after the end of the war?
Booth was an ardent Southern sympathizer. He was also a white supremacist. So what he's trying to do is decapitate the federal government, either as retribution because the South has lost the war, or perhaps trying to find a way to give the Confederacy a little bit more time to recover.
Helpers bring gravely injured Abraham Lincoln to a nearby inn. There, doctors fight for the president's life. Attacker John Wilkes Booth flees south out of the city on a horse. But the terror is not over yet. Not far from the White House, another attack is carried out that night. Secretary of State William Seward is attacked in his house by a man wielding a knife. He is gravely injured, but survives. However, the doctors are unable to save the president's life, and he dies on the morning of April the 15th. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton takes over the investigation. He focuses on John Wilkes Booth and sends a team of investigators to look for clues.
They went to the National Hotel where Booth was staying, and they searched his room, and they found certain names. And the more they looked, the more they uncovered. So it didn't take very long for them to realize that this was a conspiracy.
The conspirators have been meeting regularly in a Washington inn to make plans. On the evening of April the 14th, they spring into action. Booth shoots the president in the theater. 2 co-conspirators attack Secretary of State Seward. Additional attacks are planned. Vice President Andrew Johnson and Union General Ulysses Grant are on the conspirators' list, but these attacks fail. It's still unclear whether the conspirators had a leader. Senior government officials in the northern states suspect Jefferson Davis. Did the president of the Confederacy hope to provoke a new civil war?
It was certainly a concern that things would get out of hand. And so people were very upset. The federal government was concerned that this would, even though the war was over, that this would really throw the country back into this chaos that they had just gotten out of.
Government cohesion is at stake. The hunt for the perpetrators is the utmost priority. In the days following the attacks, investigators arrest a number of suspects, all fanatic supporters of the southern states. Booth and 2 additional conspirators are still on the run. The War Department offers a large reward for their capture and calls in the military. On April 26, 1865, soldiers discover Booth in a shed in Virginia. There's a firefight, and Booth is fatally wounded. After 12 days, the hunt for the country's most wanted man is over. On July the 7th, 1865, 4 conspirators are hanged in Washington. Investigators can't prove that they're tied to Jefferson Davis. Booth's assassination of the president is a turning point in American history.
Lincoln had intended to come to a reconciliation with the southern states, with malice towards none. His successor, Johnson, pursued much more punitive terms towards the South. The divisions that created arguably led to a century more of injustice for African Americans living below the Mason-Dixon line.
Despite the abolition of slavery, African Americans remain second-class citizens into the 20th century. Lincoln is still considered a uniter of the nation, yet his victory over the southern states ultimately leads to his downfall.
With that assassination, we realized that we have these wonderful institutions, but these institutions have to be nurtured and they have to be preserved. So it definitely is a wake-up call for us. But at the same time, I think what it does is it gives America the idea that Lincoln becomes a martyr to freedom and equality.
The assassination of Lincoln is an attack on democracy and unity in the USA. Yet Lincoln's vision of a united America inspires the country even today. In the night of August the 31st, 1888, police are called to London's Whitechapel neighborhood. Passers-by have discovered the body of a woman, savagely mutilated. The murder shocks the public, and the press can't get enough of the case. 43-year-old prostitute Mary Ann Nichols' throat has been slit. There are additional stab wounds on her lower abdomen. There's no trace of the killer. British tour guide Mick Priestley knows the area around Whitechapel and every detail of the murder.
Right here on the floor behind me, that Mary Ann Nichols was found. Give or take 5 feet, exactly where I'm standing is exactly where the body was found.
The unsolved murder of Mary Ann Nichols still puzzles experts. Forensic medicine specialist Benjamin Ondrushka analyzes the murder victim's wounds on a digital dissection table based on the autopsy report.
Here we see that she suffered injuries to the soft tissues around her neck. The fatal injury was the one to the carotid artery, marked here in red. There are also systematic cuts that look as though the killer tried to sever the neck from the front. So he caused a much more severe injury than was really necessary to kill her.
The brutal murder also throws the spotlight on the Whitechapel neighborhood. It's home to London's underclass. Crime, violence, and prostitution are everyday occurrences. If people can afford to, they avoid the area. Without prospects of social advancement, residents are ruled by the law of the street. Criminals can easily remain unrecognized in the dimly lit alleyways. And this is exactly what now causes alarm. All of London is gripped by fear and terror of a phantom on the loose in the city. 8 days after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, the killer strikes again, in Whitechapel. A resident discovers the body of 47-year-old prostitute Annie Chapman. Her body is horribly mutilated.
It is clear that the killing was a means to carry out something else. It's definitely not a random act. Too much has happened to the body. What is missing from Miss Chapman is, apart from the upper third of the vagina, the bladder and the uterus. It was all carved out along the inner edge of the pelvis with a sharp cut and removed. The person who did this knew what they were doing.
The killer probably used a knife with a blade 10 to 15 centimeters long, with surgical precision. Contemporaries even suspect that they might be a butcher or a doctor.
By the time of Annie Chapman's murder, people in the area had already become familiar with the idea that somebody was murdering the streetwalkers in the area. I think people were struggling to work out why he might be doing this, where he would strike next, and how he could actually be stopped.
The Whitechapel murders become a grisly sensation in the tabloid press.
A lot of Victorian tabloids at the time were very interested in the gory details of what were going on, to an extent that you probably don't see in today's newspapers.
The British tabloid press is still a relatively recent phenomenon at the time. Between 1836 and 1856, readership tripled.
The modern tabloid media, as we know it today, kind of began in the mid-1880s. They abolished all the taxes. Anybody could buy a newspaper, and overnight, this modern printing press had pretty much appeared. And a lot of the newspapers would be competing with each other to get the most details that would be printed in the newspaper. And in Victorian times, people couldn't get enough of those details.
The East End of London can't settle down. 3 weeks after the last murder, 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride is found dead in Whitechapel.
We're now standing on Henrique Street, which was known as Burner Street in Victorian times. Right here on the floor is where Elizabeth Stride was found.
She is considered to be the third victim of the Whitechapel killer. All the murders bear the signature of a serial killer.
So the similarities aren't a coincidence. He's looking for victims that fit that description. They're all about 5 foot tall, so he perhaps feels he can dominate them physically quite easily. Dressed in black, very similar, and that's something he will have rehearsed and gone looking for people who look like that.
There are still no witnesses or indications that expose the killer. Investigators are groping in the dark.
The police at the time believed that the killer was intimately familiar with the area and possibly lived in somewhere in the immediate area, which would appear to be the case. When he commits his murders in the middle of the night with very poor street lighting, he's able to run home in the dark. He doesn't seem to get lost. He doesn't run into a dead end. He seems to know where he's going. People often think that the police were incompetent or inept in Victorian times, or they weren't interested in catching the killer, and that wasn't really the case. It was old-school police work. Was the way you were going to catch him, knocking on doors, taking statements, following up leads.
They attempted to bring in dogs, so to track the scent. It didn't work. They used the methods that would have worked in any normal case, but unless you had somebody who knew or suspected the killer and gave them information, there was really no way of knowing for sure that you could pinpoint the right suspect.
Yet reports in the press are getting increasingly critical of the unsuccessful investigations. This places the police under increasing pressure. In the night of Elizabeth Stride's murder, another woman is murdered.
Lying here in the square, as she was found by the police, the end of Catherine's nose was missing, the bottom part of her right ear was missing. The killer had actually stabbed her in the face and brought the knife all the way down to her right jawbone and cut open both sets of her eyelids. This is an escalation of what we'd seen beforehand. By the time this was going on, there was an awful lot of pressure building on the police.
The residents of Whitechapel demand better protection in the dimly lit alleyways of the poor district.
Everybody was now vividly aware that there was, in fact, a serial killer on the loose in Whitechapel, and this was, by quite a way, the worst thing that had happened so far.
People were endlessly fascinated, but also very fearful. It changed the public's understanding that there is evil out there, mysterious individuals who kill for reasons that no one really understands.
There are still no clear leads. And yet, hundreds of letters claiming responsibility are sent to the police and the press. One letter stands out from the rest. Even today, experts doubt its authenticity. But for the tabloid press at the time, it's clear that the writer was also the killer.
Whoever wrote the letter was claiming to be the killer and was taking credit for the murders. And it was signed, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. And once that was printed in the newspaper, it was an overnight sensation. It sold millions of newspaper copies, and that is the letter that actually gave the killer the name.
The legend of Jack the Ripper is born. Yet after Catherine Eddowes is killed, the Ripper remains quiet for a while. Until November the 9th, 1888. For the first time, the Phantom murders his victim in an apartment. The crime is unspeakably gruesome. Mary Jane Kelly's intestines are found scattered around her room.
Mary Kelly's pattern of injury was even more serious than that of the previous victims. The ultimate goal of all these cases, and there is an increase in the intensity of the post-mortem dissection and the dismemberment of the cadavers, is definitely the absolute degradation of the victim, even after death.
This crime seems to mark the end of the gruesome series of Whitechapel murders.
The involvement of the Victorian newspaper press, that really is what led to Jack the Ripper becoming literally a worldwide phenomenon.
The victims become tragically famous as the Canonical Five. Experts attribute all 5 of them to the same serial killer. It is still a matter of debate whether there were additional victims.
If we assume that Mary Jane Kelly was the last victim, then we probably should assume that the killing stopped at that point because the person who was Jack the Ripper either left and went somewhere else, was locked up, or died.
And it was the first mystery that got such enormous attention, and it's always just stuck around till this day.
The case of Jack the Ripper. The brutal Whitechapel murders are still a mystery. The macabre media frenzy surrounding the unknown serial killer creates the mythos of Jack the Ripper, which lives on today. Rue de Bruxelles 21, in the heart of the French capital. On the morning of September the 29th, 1902, the housemaid brings breakfast. She works for famous author Émile Zola and his wife Alexandrine, but her employers don't respond. In thick smoke, the servants discover the lifeless bodies of the Zolas. They immediately hurry to get help. Though Alexandrine is still breathing, the servants can't save the writer. Investigations in the case show that Émile Zola died of carbon monoxide poisoning, apparently due to a plugged chimney. The police consider it a tragic accident. Yet Zola had received repeated death threats before he died. Was he the victim of an assassination? Zola was the main character in a political scandal that divided all of France. The affair began in the German embassy in Paris on September the 25th, 1894. Military attaché Maximilian von Schwarzkoppen has received sensitive information.
Un espion A spy announces in a document that he is going to deliver information about the French army to Germany. Schwarzkoppen reads this document and throws it into the wastepaper basket.
Marie Bastion works as a cleaner in the diplomat's office, but she has an additional employer.
The French intelligence service is paying Marie Bastion to search through the trash at the German embassy. On September 26th, she brings this document to the General Staff.
The paper makes it clear that the unknown informant is providing the German, Maximilian von Schwarzkoppen, with secret details. The traitor, who must be a member of top military circles, poses a threat to national security.
The General Staff panics. The traitor must be found as soon as possible.
Soon suspicion falls on a Jewish captain with German roots, Alfred Dreyfus. The sensitive information that is mentioned in the document falls under his jurisdiction. military intelligence manages to intercept additional letters. One of them uses the letter D. The military assumes that this refers to the traitor, Dreyfus. They expect that a handwriting comparison will convict him. Alfred Dreyfus is summoned under a pretense. The unsuspecting officer is asked to copy the words from the document.
But the military didn't have a handwriting expert to go to. So they went to the nation's foremost forensic expert, Alphonse Bertillon, who was indeed a forensic expert when it came to identification, but he was not a handwriting expert. And he begins to create a theory to show that Dreyfus wrote this, but it isn't that straightforward. What he's saying is that the writer, Dreyfus, was deliberately attempting to disguise his writing.
On December 19th, 1894, Dreyfus is put on trial. The military court finds him guilty of treason. His punishment? Military demotion and life in prison. He is banned to Devil's Island off the coast of South America. The trial ends with the judgment. Yet the Dreyfus affair is just picking up speed.
When Dreyfus is found guilty, nobody questions the verdict. Everyone is convinced of his guilt. The army is a kind of state within the state, practically all-powerful. And everyone thinks a military tribunal cannot be wrong. No one doubts its integrity. Anti-Semitism is very prevalent in France at the time. That's why people are very happy that the traitor is a Jew.
A Jewish traitor. This fits the worldview of many French and many Europeans. At the time, anti-Semitism is widespread and is even propagated by the Catholic Church. For this reason, most French people do not believe Dreyfus' protestations of innocence. With the help of his family, the prisoner tries to appeal, without success. It's not until March 1896 that the case takes a turn. More than a year after the conviction of Dreyfus, another letter turns up in the German embassy. Agent Marie Bastion also intercepts this document. The paper reaches the new head of the French counterintelligence, Georges Picquart. It bears the same handwriting as the letter that condemned Dreyfus. Is Dreyfus imprisoned for something he didn't do?
Dreyfus has been locked up on Devil's Island since February 1895, so it can't have been him.
Picquart unmasks the true spy, Ferdinand Walsin Esterhazy. But the intelligence chief wants to treat the matter discreetly and internally.
Picquart is torn. On the one hand, the military made a mistake. There was a judicial error. Dreyfus is innocent. On the other hand, revealing this judicial error would damage the army's reputation.
Picquart's superiors do not admit their mistake. Quite the contrary. In order to avoid damaging the military, they fabricate further evidence that points to Dreyfus. Esterhazy remains blameless. Though the press reports on the new findings, there is no public outcry. Émile Zola follows the developments of the affair. Dreyfus' story moves the writer. He wants to support him. Zola's great-granddaughter is familiar with his motives.
Zola was a man with a conscience. He stood for justice and truth. Additionally, he was a humanist. He once said, "My nights are haunted by the spectre of an innocent man who is being punished for a crime he did not commit."
Zola wants to use the power of the press to protest the cover-up of the scandal. Though he doesn't know Dreyfus personally, he puts everything on the line for him. On January the 13th, 1898, the author publishes an open letter to the president. The headline? J'accuse. I accuse.
He's following a strategy. In this article, he accuses the entire general staff, calling them all by name. He says they committed this, this, and this crime. This constitutes libel, so Zola can count on litigation. At the end of the article, he cites the legal texts and calls on the government to put him on trial. His last words, "I am waiting."
Reactions are not long in coming. Zola and Dreyfus are vilified in the press and subjected to filth and smear campaigns. Anti-Semitic papers begin a regular hate campaign. Zola is ultimately accused of defamation and must flee to exile in London. But his article has an effect. Everyone is talking about the Dreyfus case, which divides France. On one side are liberal Republicans who want a tolerant society. On the other, conservatives who are close to the Catholic Church. The Dreyfus affair serves as an outlet for this societal conflict. One side stands in solidarity with the Jewish prisoner. The other ignites anti-Semitic hatred.
The reactions were terrible. It was like a flood. People were only talking about this unbelievable article that turned everything upside down from one day to the next. The events completely reshuffled the cards.
Open debate brings the decisive turning point for Dreyfus. Picard's investigations were the catalyst. The family finds an important ally in Zola. Together, they appeal to politicians.
It required the stubbornness of just a few. They had stood up to defend a man's honor, but at the same time, they defended the honor of France and of the Republic. They brought about the downfall of this hellish machine that had buried an innocent man. Following this, the proceedings could finally be reopened.
In 1899, a Rennes military tribunal merely reduces the sentence at first. Shortly thereafter, Dreyfus is pardoned, though complete rehabilitation only comes in 1906.
The Dreyfus affair was like a seminal turning point in French history. It opened up a whole new chapter of anti-Semitism, as well as strengthening republicanism, but also it just sort of politicized the whole country in a way that ultimately became somewhat harmful.
Was Émile Zola's death on September the 29th, 1902, really an accident? Or did his involvement with the Dreyfus affair prove to be his undoing? Nearly 50 years later, the murder theory gains new momentum. A journalist claims that a furnace builder who was a professed anti-Semite deliberately plugged the chimney to release the poisonous gas that suffocated Zola. Yet there is no hard evidence for this theory.
It was a continuation of all the hate that Zola had been exposed to since the Dreyfus affair. The Dreyfus affair fundamentally changes France. Because of it, the Republican state gains the upper hand, especially over the church.
The unsolved death of Zola still overshadows the Dreyfus affair. The legal scandal divides France and weakens the Catholic Church's influence on society. In 1905, the government adopts legislation to separate church and state. Secularism is still a pillar of the French Republic today. A bloody gang war culminates in a massacre on Valentine's Day. The hunt for Chicago's most powerful crime boss begins.
This really grabs everybody's attention, right up to the president.
A baby's kidnapping keeps America in suspense. The child's father is American hero Charles Lindbergh. The case is shrouded in mystery. Traitor or hero? A lawyer fights to rehabilitate officers who planned to assassinate Hitler.
Post-war Germany without Fritz Bauer would probably have looked grim.
These spectacular crimes moved people and changed the world.
Is there any way you can lock the doors?
Sarajevo, June the 28th, 1914. On this Sunday morning, the Austro-Hungarian heir to the throne and his wife are visiting the Bosnian capital. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie reach the Sarajevo train station at 10:07. They ride toward the city hall in a motorcade where a festive reception is planned. Their route is along the Miljacka River. At 10:25, they are about half a mile from their goal. Everything is going according to plan. But an assassin lurks in the cheering crowd. He throws a bomb studded with nails and lead at the motorcade. People are injured. This is the place at the embankment where the bomb exploded in 1914. Historian Nicholas Moll has lived in Sarajevo for more than 15 years. He has meticulously worked through the events of that day.
There are various versions. Did Franz Ferdinand fend off the bomb with his arm, or did it fall on the back of the car? The fact is that the bomb falls behind the car and then explodes in front of the car behind it.
An escort officer is injured in the detonation, but Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie are spared. The motorcade continues towards City Hall. The attacker flees.
After the attacker throws the bomb, he jumps several meters down into the Miljacka River. But he's caught there by two policemen who arrest him and take him away. Due to the quick arrest, the situation seems to be under control for the moment.
Investigating Judge Leo Pfeffer interrogates the attacker, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb named Nedjeljko Kabrinovic. Pfeffer wants to uncover the background behind the attack. There is much evidence to suggest a political motive. Is Kabrinovic a member of a Serbian nationalist movement? The dual monarchy annexes Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908. Serbia sees this as a provocation, since it has claims to the territory itself. In addition, there are Serbian factions in Bosnia-Herzegovina that aspire to a greater Serbian empire, a nation to unite all southern Slavs. In Austria-Hungary, the General Staff leadership has long advocated going to war against Belgrade. Many Serbs see the heir to the throne's visit to Sarajevo as a provocation.
The timing of the visit is disastrous. The 28th of June is the Serbian national and religious holiday of St. Vitus, and the visit taking place on that day is seen as a direct and obvious insult to the Serbs.
Following the failed attack, the heir to the throne and his wife arrive at City Hall. Franz Ferdinand decides to continue the visit. To avoid further attacks, he changes the route. The convoy will head for the garrison hospital rather than the National Museum. There, the couple want to visit the officer who was injured in the attack. But not everybody seems to know about the new route. At 10:45, the motorcade reaches the Latin Bridge. Here, they're supposed to keep driving straight on. Instead, they turn off, based on the original route. It's a momentous mistake.
The governor, who was sitting in the car with Franz Ferdinand, noticed the mistake and told the chauffeur to stop and go back. So the car with Franz Ferdinand in it stopped right here.
Another assassin is standing on the corner. He fires 2 shots. The first bullet hits the Duchess in the lower abdomen, and the second hits Franz Ferdinand in the neck. They die of their injuries shortly thereafter. The police arrest the shooter on the spot. He is Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serbian student. The assassination of the Archduke and his wife shocks Europe. The heir to the throne and his wife are buried in Austria. The assassination proves explosive in the politically charged region. Investigators are under enormous pressure. Yet the attackers are cautious with their statements.
The detainees each said they were working alone, but it could be assumed that they didn't act on their own. The question was, of course, was there a conspiracy behind it?
In the days following the assassinations, investigators arrest dozens of suspected Serbs. They discover that Princip and Kaprinovic were in contact with Danilo Ilic, a member of the Serbian terror organization Black Hand. The group is led by the chief of Serbian military intelligence, Dragutin Dimitrijevic.
The Black Hand's official name was Unification or Death. Its political goal was based on a Serbian nationalist program to unite all Serbs in one nation, the Kingdom of Serbia. So the Black Hand also had networks in Bosnia, plus people there who worked with the Black Hand.
Was Belgrade complicit in the attacks? What did the Serbian government around Prime Minister Pasic know? Despite a lack of evidence, Austria-Hungary considers Serbia to be obviously complicit. Reason enough to provoke a war with its South Slavic archenemy. Austria-Hungary gets backing from its ally when the German Empire writes it a blank check. If Austria-Hungary should attack the Kingdom of Serbia, the Germans guarantee their military support. Russia is on the side of Serbia. The Russian Empire is a member of a powerful alliance with France and the United Kingdom, known as the Triple Entente. Vienna and Berlin gamble that an attack will not trigger the great powers' mutual defense clause. Austria-Hungary gives Serbia an ultimatum that includes demands that are as intolerable as possible. As expected, several conditions are unacceptable to Serbia. Serbia lets the ultimatum expire. On July the 28th, 1914, the dual monarchy declares war on Serbia. Contrary to Austria-Hungary's and Germany's assumption, the Mutual Defense Clause takes effect, which means they are now engaged in a conflict with the Triple Entente. Europe finds itself in the First World War. It will cost nearly 17 million people their lives.
The question of whether the war would have happened anyway, without the crime, is really the million-dollar question. I think it's fair to say that the war was going to happen anyway. The 2 bullets, the crime, the assassination undoubtedly provided a pretext, a way in which the war could start, and it undoubtedly affected the timing.
25 presumed conspirators are on trial for plotting to murder the heir to the throne and his wife. 3 of the accused are sentenced to death. 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, a minor, is sentenced to 20 years in prison. It later turns out that the Black Hand did in fact support the attackers with weapons and logistics, and the Serbian government knew of their plans. The Sarajevo assassination influenced the course of history like no other event. It marks the beginning of a political crisis that will culminate in the First World War. Chicago, February 14th, 1929. A bloody massacre takes place in a garage in the northern part of the city on Valentine's Day morning. The victim's murder looks like an execution.
The St. Valentine's Day massacre, because 7 people were gunned down in a small space in cold blood with machine guns, this really grabs everybody's attention, right up to the president.
Author John Binder has researched the history of organized crime in Chicago. He knows what really happened at the scene of the massacre.
Since 5 of the 7 men in the garage were members of the North Side Gang, one was a mechanic who worked for the North Side Gang, they concluded pretty quickly that it was another episode in Chicago's somewhat long-running gang war.
Organized crime rules the city in the 1920s. Yet the history of the mafia in America goes back much farther. Beginning in the mid-19th century, millions of immigrants come to the United States from Europe, fleeing poverty, war, and hunger in hopes of a better life. Yet the immigrants, among them Germans, Poles, Irish, and Italians, experience unemployment and discrimination in their new home. They form criminal factions in these environments. Initially, their influence is restricted to individual neighborhoods in the major cities. This all changes in 1920, when the government forbids the manufacture and sale of alcohol. With this prohibition, the government wants to battle not just the people's drugs, but also crime and corruption. Yet, this intervention doesn't have the desired effect.
Passing a law in Washington, D.C. isn't going to make them stop drinking. So you still had a public demand, and by making the production and sale, transportation, etc., essentially the liquor industry, by making it illegal during Prohibition, you're putting it in the hands of organized crime.
They began to expand their operations. So rather than just being local at the street or neighborhood level, it becomes citywide or statewide or even interstate. Crime becomes what we would now say organized.
The local police authorities can't stop people from selling illegal alcohol. Their jurisdiction often ends at their city border. There is no money or staff at the federal level to pursue investigations. This means the gangs have free rein to run their multi-million-dollar businesses. 2 of the gangs are direct competitors: the North Side Gang in northern Chicago and the Chicago Outfit in the south part of the city. Chicago is controlled by the mafia. Murders are everyday occurrences in the course of the brutal gang war.
The violence is largely a series of executions or assassinations. It's peripheral. It's a means to that end. They use that to achieve the goal of making money.
In the mid-1920s, Alphonse Gabriel, better known as Al Capone, takes over leadership of the Chicago Outfit. The charismatic son of Italian immigrants quickly gains power.
Once Al Capone took control of the gang in 1925, things started to really escalate. Capone had a large network of people that surrounded him and protected him. And he knew well enough that he would never want to commit a crime on his own. He would have other people do it. And it was a matter of tracing that back to him, which was almost impossible to do at the time.
Al Capone advances to become the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He earns millions and bribes local politicians and policemen. He's a gangster boss with two faces. Capone seeks publicity and supports poor communities, thereby buying their loyalty. But behind the benevolent facade is an unscrupulous businessman.
He's very good at his chosen profession, which is being a gangster, which means running these illegal businesses to make money for the gang. And that gang is also involved in narcotics, gambling, prostitution, some labor racketeering, and also in the process hurting or threatening to hurt people so that he and his gang can have their way.
Though the police hold Al Capone responsible for numerous assassinations, they can't prove a single one. On February the 14th, 1929, the gang war reaches its bloody culmination in the North Side garage.
Two cars arrive about 10:15 to 10:30 in the morning, where the men in them are posing as police officers. They go in dressed as police officers. They act like it's a police raid. They put everybody up against the wall, take their guns from them, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose.
The purported policemen are brutal gangsters. They virtually riddle the men with bullets. The gruesome St. Valentine's Day massacre shocks America.
It was brutal overkill. They used the Thompson submachine gun. They were also known as the Chicago typewriter because of how fast they would shoot. These were fully automatic weapons. They shot .45 caliber ACP bullets, and they came in a 20-round stick magazine or a 50 or 100-round drum magazine.
Witnesses see Fred "Killer" Burke near the crime scene. Though the mafia boss is supposed to have worked for Al Capone in the past, there is no proof that ties him to the massacre. Still, the press suspects that Al Capone is behind the crime.
There was a large outcry after St. Valentine's Day massacre that the federal government increased its efforts in terms of trying to get Al Capone, trying to get him convicted and sent to prison.
American President Herbert Hoover gets involved and instructs the tax authorities to convict Al Capone.
If we can't prove that he ordered murders, we can go after his money because he clearly is living beyond the amount of money that he's declaring to us in whatever taxes he does return.
The IRS has been collecting information on Al Capone since 1929. His criminal empire is an opaque network of countless cash flows. Tax investigator Frank Wilson heads the inquiry. He's considered particularly tough. Day and night, he and his team work through millions of documents, searching for evidence that could incriminate Capone.
You have to follow the money. Capone was very careful not to leave a paper trail. No accounting books, no letters, no notes. They had to use what we would now call forensic accounting. You have to trace all the little links that might exist between Capone and his known associates to the associates that we don't yet know about and their businesses. So you have to trickle down and find all these interlinking documents and individuals.
It's a tedious process. The tax investigators make slow progress. Yet, in 1931, the police achieve an unexpected breakthrough. They catch Fred "Killer" Burke on a farm. The investigators find an entire arsenal in his bungalow, including 2 Thompson submachine guns. They could be the murder weapons used in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. But to prove it, they need a renowned forensic specialist.
Kelvin Goddard was brought in to the St. Valentine's Day case, and it was his work, using a sort of comparison microscope, that proved that the guns had been used to kill the victims. And so really what we now consider to be forensic ballistics really dates back to that era.
Forensic ballistics prove that they were the weapons used in the massacre. But not even Fred Killer Burke implicates Al Capone. The background to the St. Valentine's Day massacre remains unclear. Frank Wilson and his team are more successful. A nondescript cash account book provides investigators with a new lead. $17,500 has supposedly been transferred to Al Capone from a casino. It's a starting point. The investigators identify additional business partners and get testimony that implicates the mob boss. They succeed at doing what previously seemed impossible, putting a stop to Al Capone's game. On November the 24th, 1931, a federal court sentences him to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. The Chicago mafia boss has to spend most of his time on the infamous island of Alcatraz.
He's released early in 1939 because of his mental state. He was already suffering from an advanced case of syphilis, and the authorities decided that this has so messed up his brain that, that he's not the same man he was before.
Al Capone spends the final years of his life a recluse in Florida. In 1947, he dies following a stroke. Ultimately, it's the tax fraud investigation that proves his downfall. But the 1929 Valentine's Day murders mark the turning point. The gruesome massacre goes down in American criminal history and ignites the battle against organized crime. As a result, the FBI is strategically expanded to fight crime throughout the country.
In America, there are so many different legal jurisdictions, local, county, state. You really, in order to deal with organized crime, you need a federal institution that has the power to cross those boundaries. And the Capone case was part of what built the FBI into a national crime-fighting and effective agency.
Until the Valentine's Day massacre, Al Capone is considered untouchable. Though there is no proof that he is responsible for the murders, the mob boss's image crumbles. Ultimately, it's tax evasion that proves his downfall. Investigation of tax evasion has proven itself and is used by agents even today. On the evening of March the 1st, 1932, in New Jersey, nursemaid Betty Gow goes to check on Charlie. The baby is 20 months old and has a cold. 3 hours have passed since she put him to bed. But then comes a shock.
Colonel! Colonel!
The child has disappeared without a trace. He's the baby of Anne Morrow and Charles Lindbergh. The famous pilot is an American hero. In 1927, he was the first person to fly solo and non-stop across the Atlantic.
After World War I, the United States emerged as a superpower. And he became the symbol of that. That was the context in which the child disappeared. And it resulted in the most expensive, widespread search for the kidnapper that the country had ever experienced.
Charles Lindbergh immediately calls the authorities. The New Jersey State Police are responsible. That same evening, they begin securing evidence at the Lindbergh residence. Norman Schwarzkopf heads the investigation. He follows the most important tip: a ransom demand for $50,000. The kidnapper has left it in the room. The note is written in broken English and contains an unusual mark. The writer mentions not just himself, but us. For Lindbergh and the police, it's an indication that a gang is behind the kidnapping. Hundreds of officers comb through the expansive property. The pressure is immense. The media pounces on the case.
The kidnapping of the firstborn son of aviator Charles Lindbergh is destined to be front-page news.
Investigators discover a ladder leading up to the child's room. It's an important piece of evidence. But a crowd of media representatives hinders the investigators' work.
And they wound up trampling on evidence, footprints and tire tracks, ruining a lot of it.
The kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby is now a cover story. Head Police Officer Schwarzkopf involves Lindbergh in the investigations and even lets him make many decisions. And things get even more bizarre. John Condon, a retired teacher from the Bronx, gets involved in the case.
And all of a sudden, here comes Condon, who said, I just placed an ad on my own in this local paper, and the next day I got a response, which I'm sure is genuine, from the kidnap gang.
The written response contains the same mark as the ransom note.
He was invited immediately to the New Jersey farmhouse to meet with Lindbergh. The whole thing was very odd, and the police did not ever trust Condon.
But Lindbergh involves Condon as a mediator. He's asked to organize a meeting with the extortionists, without the police. On March the 12th, 1932, Condon meets the presumed kidnapper in a cemetery in the Bronx. He says the child is in his care. As proof, he hands over a piece of the child's clothing. The Lindberghs confirm its authenticity. A handoff will take place to save the child's life. The ransom money consists of gold certificates, dollar bills that are tied to the value of gold. The police register every serial number so they can later trace the ransom money. The handoff is to again take place in a cemetery in New York without police.
Lindbergh told the police that he didn't want them doing any surveillance, that he didn't want the New Jersey police there, he didn't want the New York police there. He would just be sitting in a car 200 feet away as this transpired.
Again, Condon meets the supposed kidnapper. He hands him the ransom money and receives a note in exchange with an address where the child can presumably be found. The next day, the police search feverishly for the kidnapped baby in Massachusetts. But they are greatly disappointed. There's no sign of Charles Jr. anywhere. On May the 12th, 1932, a truck driver makes a grisly discovery just a few miles from the Lindbergh property. He discovers the body of a child in a forest. The missing Lindbergh baby seems to have been brutally murdered. The news shatters America, and the kidnapping ends in a national trauma.
There was a long article in a major paper criticizing the police that May of '32, just after the body was found, for how much they had bungled this case. And they felt that pressure.
But just 2.5 years after the kidnapping, there's a new clue. A man pays at a gas station in New York with a gold certificate. But the government has already pulled the banknotes out of circulation. The employee notes the customer's license plate. The police are able to trace the bill to the ransom money and identify its owner, German immigrant Richard Hauptmann. Investigators order a house search and find a majority of the ransom money. They seem to have caught the Lindbergh baby's killer. But Hauptmann maintains his innocence. He says he got the money from a certain Isidor Fisch, who has since died. The police don't believe the suspect's testimony. The trial of Richard Hauptmann begins on January 3rd, 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. 700 journalists are reporting from the small town. It's a media frenzy the likes of which America has rarely seen.
The atmosphere at that trial was compared to a circus, and 90% of the press was convinced from day one that this was the perpetrator.
Lindbergh appears as a witness at the trial, but the judge allows him to sit at the prosecutor's table.
That's outrageous. He was a star witness for the prosecution. It put the thumb on the scale for the jury.
Lindbergh says that, without a doubt, he recognizes Hauptmann's voice as the voice of the man from the cemetery. But Lindbergh was 200 feet away from the handoff at the time.
The problem with that is no one could ID a voice from that distance 2 years later. You probably couldn't even do it a month later. So that was absurd.
It is still a mystery why Lindbergh insisted on this point. But Condon also testifies in court that he recognizes Hauptmann, though he wasn't able to during a pre-trial police interrogation. The burden of proof against Hauptmann keeps getting more overwhelming.
The state had an expert who identified one rail of the ladder with a floorboard in Hauptmann's landlord's attic and said they came from the same tree. And that was convincing to that jury. There's a controversy about is whether his visual examination was accurate.
The ladder that the perpetrator used to get into the house is closely examined once more. The analysis is carried out by specialist Erastus Hudson.
He found over 500 fingerprints, and many of them were because the police and the reporters mishandled the ladder. But when it was taken apart, there was a set of prints on an inside joint that could have only been made by the person who constructed the ladder. And when they arrested Hauptmann, Dr. Hudson called the police and said, "Have you checked his fingerprints against the ones you found on an inside joint?" And they checked them after that, and they said they don't match. And he said, "You've got the wrong guy."
The public prosecutor offers to waive the death penalty if the accused confesses, but Hauptmann refuses. The trial lasts a month before the final judgment is made. Jurors find Hauptmann guilty. He is executed on April 3rd, 1936.
I'm hoping to see Hauptmann posthumously exonerated, and so I would like to see the open question of the whether the wood is identical resolved by a wood DNA test. The state of New Jersey still has both pieces of wood, so it could be done.
It's just one of the questions that the case leaves open. The judicial system has no interest in a revision, but they see a need for action. The Lindbergh Law comes into effect.
The
law changes to make child abduction a federal crime, and that meant that the FBI was enabled to investigate child abductions and, in fact, any kidnapping across state lines thereafter.
The Lindbergh kidnapping, a case that holds an entire nation in suspense. What influence did public pressure and the media, not to mention Lindbergh himself, have on the outcome of the case? Many legal experts today are critical of the trial and Richard Hauptmann's death sentence. There is still doubt about whether he was guilty. July 20th, 1944, East Prussia. General Staff Officer Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg arrives at the Führer's headquarters, known as Wolf's Lair. He is part of a group of conspirators who want to kill Adolf Hitler. It's already becoming apparent that the German Reich will lose the Second World War. The officers want to end the war as quickly as possible. The bomb explodes at 12:42 p.m. It's an attempted assassination of Adolf Hitler. 4 people are killed in the attack, and more are injured. Stauffenberg immediately returns to Berlin. He and his accomplices now want to put their plans for a coup into action. Operation Valkyrie has been planned long beforehand. Upon Hitler's death, the military is to take over power in Berlin. One man is key to this plan, Otto Ernst Riemer. He knows nothing about the conspiracy. The officer heads the Guard battalion in Berlin. Now he is to advance plans for a military coup. Riemer receives this order from a superior, Lieutenant General Paul von Haase, himself one of the conspirators.
He and his people were meant to seal off the government quarters and arrest leading representatives of the National Socialist State. He embarked on this mission and visited Goebbels, who informed him that Hitler was alive. He arranged for a telephone call between Riemer and Hitler in Wolf's Lair, so Riemer would know Hitler had survived the attack.
I recognize your voice.
And he was commissioned by Hitler to crush the attempted coup.
The coup fails. The resistance fighters are arrested. Stauffenberg and 3 other conspirators are summarily executed. The Nazi propaganda machine praises Riemer for quelling the attempted coup. He is promoted to Major General. Scarcely 9 months later, Germany lies in ruins. World War II is lost and the fate of the criminal Nazi regime is sealed. Yet, the public's view of the July 20th assassination attempt does not change right away.
In 1945, people already openly knew and saw the horrible crimes that this regime had perpetrated. And still, the public didn't consider the conspirators to be heroes at this point. They saw them as absolute criminals.
A 1951 survey shows that only 1/3 of Germany views the July 20th attempt at resistance as positive. In 1949, Otto Ernst Rehmer takes part in the establishment of the SRP party. It's one of many right-wing nationalist factions in post-war Germany.
The SRP, the Socialist Reich Party, was probably the most extreme and radical of them, and they unashamedly subscribed to National Socialism. And Rehmer was their poster boy.
The atmosphere that the end of denazification creates really emboldens right-wing individuals like Rehmer to make their views publicly known and to express them as freely as they wish.
On May the 3rd, 1951, at a campaign event in Lower Saxony, Rehmer describes the conspirators as traitors. Interior Minister Robert Lehr files a legal complaint charging him with malicious defamation. The case goes to the district court in Braunschweig. Attorney General Fritz Bauer immediately recognizes the far-reaching consequences that convicting Rehmer could bring. Fritz Bauer is a legal expert who lived in Germany until 1936, when, as a Jew and a Social Democrat, he fled into exile. He returns in 1949 with a mission.
He was firmly convinced that a democracy needs Democrats. It would not be possible to repress and forget what happened.
He wanted to rehabilitate the attempted assassins of July 20th, and he wanted to legitimize the right to resist in general.
The Rehmer trial writes legal history, because it will also reach a decision regarding public perception of the July 20th act of resistance. On March the 7th, 1952, the trial against Otto Ernst Rehmer begins.
This really was a groundbreaking trial, which really fundamentally altered perceptions of justice in post-war Germany.
Whereas Rehmer's far-right supporters are hoping for acquittal, the resistance fighters' families want justice for their loved ones.
It's a very tense atmosphere that is really looking ahead to the future. How do we deal with this? How can the nation manage to build and create a positive future from the experiences of this terrible past?
Historians and experts speak during the 4 days of the proceedings. One topic of discussion is the question of whether the oath to the Führer was legally binding. Starting in 1934, every soldier had to swear loyalty to Hitler. Did the resistance fighters therefore commit high treason? In his closing argument, Fritz Bauer argues that one cannot commit high treason when the state is illegitimate.
Because you cannot betray a state that is criminal. It has betrayed its own people. It is criminal. And those who support such a state are themselves criminal.
On March the 15th, 1952, the court sentences Rehmer to 3 months in prison. However, he manages to flee the country. Still, his sentence is of major importance. It legally rehabilitates the resistance fighters of July 20th. Their wives retrospectively receive widows' pensions.
It was a turning point for the family members, simply from a material point of view and with a view to their social standing.
The Rehmer trial enshrines in German law the right to resist. So it's a very significant moment, because what it means is to plot against an existing regime under certain circumstances will be seen as a valid and legal thing to do.
For Fritz Bauer, this success is merely a partial victory. He continues to fight for a democratic society and to pursue the Nazis' crimes before the law.
Post-war Germany without Fritz Bauer would probably have looked grim. The Federal Republic owes him a great deal.
The Rehmer trial. an important step in the nation's examination of its National Socialist past, and a landmark decision for German democracy. Colombia, in the grip of the cartels. A drug lord challenges the state, Pablo Escobar.
The cartels in Colombia were so powerful that they came to challenge the effective functioning of the state.
A teenager is murdered in London. The motive is racism. The case can only be solved once the legal precedent is overturned. Littleton, Colorado. A school massacre traumatizes America. The perpetrators are driven by their craving for recognition and bloodlust.
It's the worst thing I'd ever seen, that's no doubt about it, you know, and what they did to those children.
These are crimes that moved people and changed the world. Los Angeles, California. On the morning of August the 9th, 1969, the police are called to a mansion on Cielo Drive. Investigators find 5 bodies on the property. The victims display gunshot wounds and are covered with stab wounds. It's a disturbing sight, even for experienced police officers.
When the first LAPD officers arrived on the scene, they were overwhelmed by what they found. The blood and the number of victims and the viciousness with which they'd been killed.
The media catch wind of the case. Linda Deutsch is reporting from Los Angeles at the time.
It was a horrendous scene. We had a reporter at the house who had gone there first thing in the morning, and he was dictating details to me on the phone of what he saw. And it was horrific. Here we were, you know, at the doorstep of Hollywood, and we were looking at a horror movie.
At the scene, the officers find small amounts of marijuana, LSD, and cocaine. The word pig is written on the front door in blood. One of the victims is the famous actress Sharon Tate. She is heavily pregnant when she and her friends are murdered. The drugs at the site lead investigators to an initial clue.
They kind of seem to have reached a rather hasty conclusion that this had been a drug deal gone bad.
In view of the circumstances, the media speculates about other reasons for the murders. Soon there's talk of ritual murder, potentially tied to drugs. The massacre shocks America. Sharon Tate is married to Roman Polanski. They are a perfect Hollywood couple. The world-famous director is in Europe at the time of the crime.
The tragedy of it, of him losing this gorgeous wife, who was 9 months pregnant with their child, was so heartrending.
The public is shocked. But the horror is not over yet. 24 hours after the Tate murders, police are called to a mansion on Waverly Drive in Los Angeles. Officers find the bodies of the homeowners, covered with countless stab wounds. They are the entrepreneurial couple Rosemary and Lino LaBianca. The crime scene is similar to the one on Cielo Drive. There are bloody messages like "Death to the pigs" on the walls.
Everybody said, "Oh my God, it's a copycat killing." We never, ever thought that it could be the same killers.
A different police unit is responsible for the LaBianca murders. The crime scenes are just 9 miles apart, but they're not in the same district. the investigators fail to exchange key information.
They overlooked the fact that a man had been found murdered in a completely different location.
9 days prior to the Tate murders, musician Gary Hinman is found dead in his house. The crime scene is 12 miles from Cielo Drive and bears the same hallmarks. The body exhibits several stab wounds. The killer leaves the message, "Political Piggy," on the wall in Hinman's blood. Was Gary Hinman a victim of the same murderers? A paw print is also found at the site, the symbol of the Black Panther Party. The African-American civil rights movement often defames police officers as pigs. Its followers fight discrimination and racism in the USA. Yet, the investigators target somebody else, Bobby Beausoleil. He is not a member of the Black Panthers. Police arrest him for the murder of Gary Hinman.
So when the LaBiancas were killed, those detectives who were younger and had more training, they began to think that maybe these cases are linked.
But at the time of the Tate and LaBianca murders, Bobby Beausoleil is already in jail. Investigators look into the suspect's environment and his connections in the hippie scene. The hippie movement emerges in 1960s San Francisco as an alternative to conservative America. Mostly young Americans, they advocate free love and peace in Vietnam and are opposed to capitalism. Bobby Beausoleil lives in a Californian commune with other hippies. One of them is 14-year-old Diane Lake.
There was playing music, getting high, and getting food. You know, we'd go to the dumpsters behind the grocery stores and jump in and look for good food.
Members of the commune frequently come in conflict with the law. The group sometimes lives on an abandoned ranch in Death Valley. In October 1969, police carry out a raid there. Several members are arrested for auto theft and other offenses, among them Susan Atkins. The 21-year-old lands in a women's prison. 3 months have gone by since the series of brutal murders, and there are still no clues to the killers. This changes abruptly as Atkins suddenly comes clean.
She was put in a holding cell with a couple of other women who were very chatty and liked talking and getting to know her, and she couldn't resist finally. She told the whole story. She told them about the killings. She told them when they happened, where they happened. She told them that she had killed Sharon Tate.
Her fellow inmates inform the prison staff. Atkins' confession sheds light on the series of murders. Together with others from her commune, Susan Atkins has committed the Tate and LaBianca murders. The supposed hippie commune reveals itself to be a murderous cult.
We were like a family, and I still can't believe that the girls did what they did. It's just mind-boggling to me that they could actually kill somebody.
One man orders the murders, Charles Manson. An unsuccessful musician turned sect leader, he's the head of the group known as the Manson family.
It was a nightmare come to life, a cult that no one had ever seen before. Cults were not that common at that time in '69. There had been one or two that I know of, but a kind of cult where they worshipped one man, where they followed him and said they would kill for him, that was new.
Manson recruits his followers from the hippie scene. They're frequently young, directionless, and looking for recognition. Manson is said to have used drugs, sex, and violence to make them submissive. Young women in particular feel drawn to him. One of them is Patricia Krenwinkel.
Patricia Krenwinkel was not pretty. And he took her, he saw her and saw her looking at him, and he said, "Come with me." And he took her into a bedroom, and he said, I want you to take off all your clothes. And she said, "No." And he said, "Yes, you're going to take off all your clothes and look in the mirror and see how beautiful you are." That was Manson.
Diane Lake also falls victim to Manson's charm. His followers worship him like a prophet.
He'd had this, crucifixion experience. And he would reenact that when we were on acid. I think he just went off the deep end in believing that he really was some kind of messiah.
Equally delusional was the supposed murder motive. The public prosecutor believes Manson wanted to provoke a race war between whites and blacks. The messages at the crime scenes are intended to direct suspicion to the Black Panthers. Manson makes no secret of his racist attitude. Yet his motive is contested even today.
He testified at the trial at great length. He didn't mention any race war. He was a madman. How can you particularly attribute a motive to a madman? I think it will remain a mystery forever.
The trial against the Manson family begins on June the 15th, 1970. It's a media circus. Manson seems to enjoy the spotlight. He shows no sign of regret.
I don't know if I've ever encountered anyone so completely evil. He was evil.
The accused are condemned to death, but California does away with the death penalty shortly afterward. For the convicts, this means imprisonment for life.
Manson was the trial of the 60s. It was the trial of alienated young people, of drugs, of LSD. It was the trial of a society that was losing its mind.
In 2017, Charles Manson dies in prison at 83. But his sinister case lives on in films, musicals, and books. The Manson murders also destroy the innocent hippie dream of love and peace. People begin to look at cults more critically. For years, this murderous sect leader would discredit many things in the USA that aspired to be outside the mainstream. Soacha, Colombia. On August the 18th, 1999, Luis Carlos Galan appears before thousands of supporters during a campaign event. The liberal politician is considered the favorite to win the presidential election in Colombia. Suddenly, shots are fired. Galan is hit and dies of his injuries a short time later. He had made enemies in his battle against the drug cartels. Colombia in the 1980s. Mismanagement and corruption have paralyzed the country. Criminal structures pose challenges to the state.
The balance of power in Colombia is very fragile during the 1980s. Literally hundreds of judges and officials in the criminal justice system have been murdered.
Attacks on civil servants, business people, and journalists are part of everyday life in Colombia. Violent protests keep the country's nerves on edge. Colombia is divided. The powerful elite in the capital, Bogotá, consists primarily of two parties: the conservatives and the liberals. In the country's interior, Genuine paramilitaries and leftist guerrilla groups are at war. Their struggle is directed at and against the government. Two large criminal organizations are also involved in the battle for power: the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel, named for the cities from which they originate. They have specialized in the production and sale of cocaine.
The resources and the brutality of the cartels means that the legitimacy of the state, the ability of the government to rule effectively, is really coming under question.
Deep in the country's interior, the cartels operate huge coca plantations. The territory is difficult to access and can scarcely be monitored. Cocaine is manufactured from the leaves of coca plants in the remote laboratories, more than 130 tons per year in the late 1980s. Douglas Farrar is reporting from Colombia for the Washington Post at the time.
The narcos were clearly penetrating everywhere. They were in economics, they were in politics, they were controlling streets, and political elite were enormously corrupt and enormously focused on maintaining their grips on power.
Luis Carlos Galán wants to reform Colombia. He runs for president in 1989.
He was charismatic, and he was really sort of charming to watch, and like he had the capacity to really move people, and so he was going to be president.
Galán's claim to power doesn't just pose a threat to the political elite. He also campaigns for a crackdown on the drug lords. The most powerful of them is Pablo Escobar, the Medellin drug lord. Though he grew up in poverty, he is now one of the world's richest people. Escobar feels invincible. His influence on politics and justice protects him from the police. The poor people of Medellin honor him as a kind of Robin Hood. He presents himself as a philanthropist and invests money in the community. But the drug lord walks across bodies to keep his businesses going. His net worth is estimated at about $30 billion. His power is based on a network of dependencies and bribery. Those who can't be bought are killed.
I think the thing that for Escobar initially was his ability to think big. Instead of moving 50 kilos, how to produce 5,000 kilos and move it to the United States.
Escobar wants to conquer the US drug market. His airplanes transport tons of cocaine to Miami. This has disastrous consequences for American society.
Despite our best efforts, illegal cocaine is coming into our country at alarming levels, and 4 to 5 million people regularly use it.
The authorities are powerless. They can frequently only confiscate small amounts of cocaine in raids. It's a fraction of the amount that Escobar is flooding the market with.
Increasingly, they start to track the drugs back to their sources, and the American government becomes directly involved in destroying facilities at source.
With the help of the US, Colombian security forces manage to locate and destroy the drug labs. But the United States want more. They demand that the Bogotá government extradite Escobar.
Escobar is extremely concerned about being extradited to the United States. The last thing he wants to do is face justice outside of Colombia, because inside of Colombia, he feels he will always be able to work the system or get himself released or get himself broken out.
Luis Carlos Galán allies himself with the USA. The Liberal presidential candidate speaks out in favor of extraditing the drug lords.
Pablo Escobar and I think the political elites clearly understood that if he came into power, their structure would be in serious jeopardy. And so you couldn't let that happen.
On August the 18th, 1989, Galan is making a campaign speech. A killer commando shoots the politician in front of running cameras. The crime shocks the entire nation.
The Galan killing was like a red flag. Oh my God, here's a person who's trying to kill presidential candidates. Most people assumed correctly in the end it was Pablo Escobar.
Following the murder of Galan, Escobar is seen as a terrorist in the eyes of the world. The government is under pressure to act. Colombian President Cesar Gaviria works out a dubious deal. The state refrains from extradition. In return, Escobar agrees to a 5-year prison sentence. But the drug lord isn't satisfied with this. He has his prison built himself, and he determines the prison conditions.
Their families were going to be up there, that all of their main hitmen and their leadership was going to be there. They're having their parties on the weekends, the prostitutes who had been up there, we were talking to, and so we knew that this was like a giant, giant farce. So when the government finally had to take a stand because there was so much reporting, so finally the pressure grew.
The government sends troops to put an end to the spectacle. Escobar manages to flee. The USA helps hunt the drug baron, including with the use of modern wiretapping technology.
Generally, Pablo was very careful about staying under the 2 minutes or whatever they knew it took to really start tapping. But one day he calls and he stays on the phone for almost 10 minutes because he's missing his family, and that's a huge mistake.
The security forces are able to locate Escobar in a house in Medellin. On December the 2nd, 1993, there's an exchange of gunfire. The man who is probably the most famous drug lord in history dies in a hail of bullets. The wealth he gains from his ruthless behavior helps Escobar gain unprecedented power. Yet the murder of presidential candidate Galan forces the government to act. The United States helps bring Escobar down. Ultimately, though, others take over the business. The export of drugs from Colombia continues unabated. On the evening of April 22nd, 1993, 2 young men are on their way home in London. But one of them is suddenly attacked. It's 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence. He lives with his family in Eltham, in southeast London. His brother Stuart is home at the time. At about 11 p.m., he learns about the attack on Stephen. Today, 46-year-old Stuart Lawrence is able to reconstruct that evening's events based on eyewitness reports.
And they walked across the roundabout to this bus stop here to get the 122 or 161 back down to Woolwich Common to my house. A group of guys on the other side of the roundabout saw them, shouted at them, what, and then started running towards them. The group proceeded to kick, stab, and hit my brother over the head with a scaffolding pole.
Stephen dies at the scene.
There was 2 other murders that happened in the area at the same sort of time, which was Rohit Dougal and Roland Adams. So Stephen was the 3rd sort of murder of that type.
London, 1993. Radical right-wing parties are well received in the southeast part of the city. Their racist rhetoric falls on particularly fertile soil in low-income white circles. This results in protests. Activists demonstrate against racism. The murder of Stephen Lawrence is a rallying cry for them.
By the time we get to the Stephen Lawrence murder, it's really no surprise that this is a seismic event within London. The so-called sus laws, the power to arrest on suspicion, the extensive use of stop-and-search powers have created tensions between the police and certain communities in London for decades.
Mostly minorities are affected by the controversial policing methods. The Metropolitan Police are investigating the Stephen Lawrence case. They look for connections between the black student and the drug scene, though eyewitnesses indicate there was a racist motive. The police receive anonymous tips from the public. Dozens of notes containing the names of the alleged perpetrators.
I think their names were mentioned 24 times in the first 2 days. They were known to be part of a very violent gang. There was every reason that they were good suspects.
The 5 young men are between 16 and 18. Some of them have already been convicted of minor offences, yet the investigators don't question them.
The first 6 or 7 weeks when the names of these perpetrators were being spoken about, that we started to get this sort of idea of, well, if everyone's saying the same thing, why are they not doing nothing about it?
By delaying the arrests as long as we did, we made the investigation considerably harder and the chance of success harder.
Police tail the suspects and photograph them getting rid of suspicious trash bags, yet they don't inspect their contents.
It could have been blood-stained clothing, it could have been laundry, but you'd have to say that that was an opportunity to get evidence. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it, really?
2 weeks after the crime, the Lawrence family insists on meeting the police. The victims' parents demand that the authorities act.
As we went to the meeting, my mum had a piece of paper and said, look, here are the names of the people that we've been told that are involved in this. What are you going to do about it? And my mum remembers him having this piece of paper in his hand, and throughout the whole meeting, the piece of paper being folded and folded and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And as she left, she remembers saying to him, oh, you're going to throw that in the bin now, aren't you? And he's like, oh, no, I'm not. And he started to unravel it. He's like, no, this is important, this is important.
Pressure is mounting on the investigators. 3 of the suspects are arrested. The media are also eagerly following the developments in the case. Investigators interrogate the young men. Soon, they drop the allegations.
The police were saying, we've got nothing here, guys. We've got no evidence. We've got no witnesses. The government said we're no longer pursuing this, and that's why, as a family, we said, fine, we'll do it ourselves. We'll take all the information that you've got and we'll pursue it ourselves in a private prosecution.
The Lawrence family renounces the support of the police and the judiciary and takes matters into their own hands, launching the first private murder prosecution in 150 years. Supported by donations by the public, they pursue charges against all 5 suspects beginning in 1994. Yet, they are acquitted.
That was it. The law as it stood in Great Britain was you could never be tried again for that offence.
The population is outraged. Journalists reach their own verdict in their headline in the Daily Mail. On the front page, they condemn the 5 suspects as killers and publish their photos and names. The case becomes a federal case. Home Secretary Jack Straw gets involved. William Macpherson, a retired judge, is assigned to examine the case. In 1999, he and his team published their report. The so-called Macpherson Report shocks Great Britain.
Headlines of this report are findings of a bungled investigation and institutional racism on the part of the Metropolitan Police.
If you'd have lined up 100 police officers and said, what's institutional racism? Probably 99, including me, would have said, I don't know. I think that we realised we had to change, but I think it took time.
The case changes legislation. A second charge in the same case is now possible if there is new evidence. Still, the Lawrence file remains closed 7 years later. In 2006, investigator Clive Driscoll comes across the documentation by coincidence.
There were all these papers, and I went over to one of the boxes and just opened it, and the first picture I saw was Stephen. I said, look, this is Stephen's papers. I'll take it on. We can't just leave them like that.
Clive Driscoll takes on the case and examines it once more. He and his team question the witnesses again. Driscoll turns to the Lawrence family.
Clive, by that time, had realised we as a family were like, we don't believe none of you guys, like. And it was for his job to try and prove that he was different to the others.
Clive Driscoll also uses new forensic methods for the old evidence from the evidence room.
One of the scientists saw a little blob, and that turned out to be blood. It turned out to be Stephen's blood, and it turned out to be on a fibre which was on Gary Dobson's jacket.
Traces of the crime are also found on David Norris's clothes.
That was what the game changer was. Like, that was the bit that we never had before, was a piece of evidence that confirmed that they were there on that night.
With the new evidence, a second charge can be brought. The trial begins on November 14th, 2011. 19 years after committing the crime, Gary Dobson and David Norris are found guilty. They are sentenced to 15 and 14 years in prison, the longest sentence possible for the men who were minors at the time.
I thought the sentences weren't long enough because they've able to have their life. They've been able to have kids, go on holiday, enjoy Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries with family members, etc., etc. And Steve never had that opportunity for all those years that he was taken from us.
No charges can be brought against the other alleged perpetrators. The Lawrence family is still fighting for their conviction.
There's no doubt that the murder of Stephen Lawrence, the changes that were made, were a useful starting point. Sadly, if you look, though, at subsequent events, it was just the starting point of changes which are still ongoing.
The Lawrence case holds a mirror up to an entire nation and exposes racism in the police force. The murder goes unpunished for much too long. Yet the fight for justice leads to the conviction of the two main perpetrators. It's a painful milestone on the path to a society without discrimination. Columbine High School in Colorado.
There is a certain smell in the air that happens around the time in April that my body gets really keyed up. So for me, the smell of school buses brings me back to Columbine.
20th of April, 1999. Lunch break at Columbine High School. A security camera shows the school's busy cafeteria. Kim is 15 and a student at the time.
I mean, it was a typical day. I was in the downstairs level where kind of the cafeteria is, and I saw Coach Dave Sanders and had like a conversation with him.
Kim and several other students enter their classroom. It's time for science class.
I was sitting in kind of at our like lab tables, waiting for class to start.
The classroom is on the second floor. It's 11:19. The cafeteria is still busy. Then the unthinkable happens.
All of a sudden, we heard kind of like this like loud booms or loud noises. And then people ran into our classroom and said they've got guns. And so we all got under our tables.
The shots are coming from outside. In the cafeteria, students also seek protection under the tables. A few minutes later, the first emergency calls reach the police.
What's your emergency?
Apparently there's been a shooting up here at the Columbine High School.
Okay. We've got people on the way. Do you have any more information?
No, I don't.
The situation is unclear. Special police units, SWAT teams, are called in. Among them is Sergeant Grant Whitus.
I was actually off that day home cleaning my boat, and the pager went off, and then we call in and say, where do we need to go and what's happening? And they said, there's people being shot and bombs going off in Columbine High School.
Explosives are detonated in the cafeteria. A patrol officer arrives at the scene first. 2 students lie dead on the ground in front of the school. The police seal off the area and wait for the SWAT team. At 11:57, the security camera shows 2 heavily armed young men.
When we were in the classroom, I could hear footsteps outside and I could hear voices. And then the classroom next door, it wasn't a classroom, it was just like a lab storage room, was shot into. And so that was terrifying.
News stations broadcast the events live.
We had a TV in our room, and that was really scary. We muted it because they thought the shooters were still alive and in the building. And so that was like a big wave of fear.
The police initially treat the situation like a kidnapping. To get a clearer picture, they question students on site. They assume there are 7 to 9 perpetrators who are still in the building. The SWAT teams get ready to strike. They are going to storm the school from various sides. An hour has gone by since the initial shots.
When I got there, there were so many cars and so many cops. And I'm still saying, what's happened? And they said, well, the bombs are going off. There's children shot. We're going in.
Grant Whitus and his unit storm the cafeteria. From there, they secure one room after another.
We break the door, and it's full with 20 children and teachers. But the children didn't want to move. It was a phenomenon I've never seen and a fear I've never seen. There's a level of fear you may not be able to understand that's going to leave them frozen. So you're going to have to get them moving.
The first students are evacuated from the building. There's still no sign of the perpetrators.
And then as we finished up the basement, we start moving up the stairway, and the stairway led us right into the science room.
Here, Kim has been hiding for more than 2 hours.
Grant and his team entered the room, which was really scary in itself to see these big men dressed in like all their SWAT gear. And at that point, I don't think I thought I, again, was safe because I still had to get out of the school.
The police are afraid the perpetrators could disguise themselves as released students. They lead the children out of the school in groups, with their hands raised. A school bus brings them to a nearby elementary school. Kim is among them.
I was still on the school bus, and I saw my older brother's really good friend. And I reached out the window, yelling at him, telling him I was okay. And that was when I felt safe.
The SWAT team continues to work its way through the school. In one of the windows, there's a sign reading, "One bleeding to death." It's teacher Dave Sanders. The students are fighting for his life.
2 young boys, taking care of him. One of them had his shirt off and he was holding it on him for, trying to stop the bleeding. He could barely breathe at the time. And then one moment we're talking to him and he has, he's saying, show me pictures of my wife and kids. And then, then he dies right there. So, it's certainly a hard thing to deal with.
The SWAT team continues its search for the perpetrators. The special unit reaches the library.
Right when we got to the doors, I immediately said, I'm going in. And then we went in immediately. It's the worst thing I'd ever seen. That's no doubt about it. There was 3 girls immediately when I walked in, all 3 with gun wounds to them. One of them was alive. As I stepped over the first girl, the second girl held her hand up, you know, to like help me. And I said, I can't stop, hon, I gotta go. And I just kept going because we found the place they're at. You know, it was apparent. Here, to my right, there was bodies. Here, I've got 3 kids shot. So in my mind, well, we found where this is going on and we're about to get into a firefight. I took a right, went down a couple aisles, and then found Klebold and Harris laying right there. There was no doubt that was 2 of them.
They are both students at Columbine High School. They have shot themselves. The police are certain that there are no additional perpetrators. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold have shot 12 fellow students and a teacher. Another 24 victims are partially badly wounded. Investigators find 2 propane bombs in the cafeteria. The ignition failed. A detonation could have killed hundreds of students. Police search the homes of the perpetrators' parents. They find the shooters' self-made videos and notes and look into how the teenagers got hold of the weapons. The media speculate on the perpetrators' motives. The young men are said to be outsiders who were bullied and wanted to take revenge on their fellow students. Later analyses reach another conclusion. They believe Harris was a psychopath and Klebold was suicidal. They both wanted to become famous as killers. They achieve this. Several copycat criminals later refer to Columbine. Criticism is leveled at how journalists reported on the school rampage.
Because it's so unprecedented, I had no sense of how to present this. Initially, there was considerable focus on the shooters, why they may have done what they did, what their background at school was. It moved out towards a much broader national debate about social issues around alienated youth, around gun crime, and around violence.
The USA is divided. Many call for the laws to be tightened. Harris and Klebold got their weapons from friends who were of legal age. But many Americans also vehemently defend the right to bear weapons. The shots of Columbine still echo today. Victims and their families still suffer from the consequences of April 20th, 1999.
When I'm in a room or I'm anywhere, I know where my exits are, right? And that's never gonna go away, right? And I didn't have that before. Columbine influences my everyday living. It influenced my decision of whether to have a kid or not have a kid. In any big life event or life change, Columbine influences it. And so I think I will forever have to work through that.
Columbine was the first school shooting with over 10 fatalities. Sadly, it appears that mass school shootings are becoming both more frequent and more lethal.
The Columbine school massacre traumatizes America. Conservatives call for teachers to be armed. The other side fights for greater restrictions on gun purchases. The police change their tactics and training so they can react more quickly in similar cases. Columbine seems to have opened a kind of floodgate during a time of equally psychologically disturbed copycats.